as we've grown up with different kinds of beverages. If you look at these sodas, there's not necessarily a lot of acid in them. They have kind of an acidic flavor to them. And wine especially. And I think there's a big rush to move to balance things with acid that not all the time need that. Especially citric acid. A lot of people use acid blends. And I'm not a big fan of acid blends because they tend to go heavy on the citrus and or the citric acid, excuse me. And, it feels like somebody just put like a pixie sticks on steroid on my tongue when I taste those. It's kind of like a 1,000 little needles poking into my tongue, and it's all like, oh, this one's been adjusted with citric acid. It's easy to tell. But I do think that adjusting with acid, mainly tartaric and some malic, has a lot of benefits as well. And Eric was right when he said there's a lot of mead out there that is just flabby. It's sweet, and the sweetness isn't balanced by any acid. And, the types of acid that make up the flavor and that are present in honey, while they can drive the pH down kind of low in certain cases, they don't really translate in a lot of cases if they're not adjusted and treated post-fermentation to bring that acid level up to where it makes the sweetness pop rather than just having it sit heavily on your palate and do nothing other than fade into some ignominious, tasteless ending on a long finish, that just tastes like raw honey. I don't think anybody really wants that. But I think a really good traditional has to have some brightness and some mineral to it, as well as that sweetness or the dryness. And that's the other side of the equation, is when you don't have that sweetness and they're adding acid to it, doesn't necessarily do you any favors. Especially if it's dry, you don't want it to be harsh and bitey and hot from the acid. And the other thing is, a lot of people will make dry traditionals that are high in alcohol, which is fine. But one of the things that I found in both judging and in doing sensory is that the higher the alcohol in a dry traditional, the hotter it tends to be, unless it's had a chance to age and mellow. But there's not and correct me if I'm wrong, but there's not a lot of meaderies that are holding dry traditionals before they release it to sell it for more than a couple of years at a time, for more than a year at a time even, or 6 months. I'm sure there's exceptions to that. But the bottom line is they got to move stuff, because the footprint of that stuff in the meadery is going to cost them money. They want to get it out onto the shelves and get it moving. And so with the admonition of having a balanced dry mead as well as a balanced semi-sweet and sweet and dessert sweet wine, mead that is, there's got to be some, customer information to put out there. This is a dry mead. It will benefit from aging. If you want to buy this mead and age it, that would be the best. If you want to buy something and drink it right now, get one of our other products, one of these instead. Or get both of them and save one and drink the other. But consumers, I watched it down at my little place that I go to down here by my house, the Wine Exchange, when they brought mead in. People had some dry mead and they were like, "Oh, this could be really good, but it's kind of harsh, is it?" And these are educated wine drinkers, so they know how to articulate whether it's alcohol harsh or just acidic harsh. And 9 times out of 10, that was alcohol, because the particular meads that I'm thinking of that they had out there as offerings were at 15% and 14%. Which can still be done right, and it can still be, a really elegant dry mead, as long as it's matured. But at the same time, the lower the alcohol, the lower the heat is going to be on the initial, attack on the palate. So it's good to be cognizant of the fact that alcohol lends more body at a higher level of sweetness and more heat at a lower level of sweetness. So now we're on alcohol.
Can I interrupt with a question or two?
Sure.
Well, so one of the things that I've done, and I call it kind of cheating, but it's really not. I really like to make traditionals. I totally took to heart what I read with all the stuff that you contributed in Got Mead when I first started 3 years ago. And now that people come and ask me, can you help me out? I always insist, okay, we're going to learn to make traditionals first, and we're going to learn to make them well, so that we're going to raise the bar with everything you do for the rest of your life by learning to make the trads nicely to begin with. One of the things that I'm not sure why it works, but it seems to work for me, well, twofold. One of the things that I've thought about making a dry traditional is that if I start with a higher gravity with a high alcohol, so this is a sack mead, if I have a high gravity, I can change the perception of the sweetness by adding astringency from oak. And so then when I move the perception, and maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like I can sometimes move the perceived sweetness level maybe 20 points.
Oh, absolutely.
And so then now we take something that's maybe 1030 or 1040, and we quote dry it out with particular types of oak. The people will taste it as a 10.6, 10.7, but it still has the nice volume and the lushness that gravity adds to it. That sweetness seems to kind of curb the heat from the alcohol, and I also feel like with particular species of oak and at different toast levels, I can also curb that alcohol edge just from my tannin additions alone. Can you speak to whether that's all just perceptional magic in the palate, or do tannins actually bind with the alcohol earlier on during the polymerization to smooth it out or not? Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, well, the tannins actually work in your mouth to lower that kind of perception, that heat perception from the alcohol. They bind with your saliva, the different polymers, excuse me, not polymers, but phenols from the mead will bind with saliva in your mouth. That'll create a little bit of a buffer from the heat from the alcohol, as I understand it, from the and Anita Oberhoster up at UC Davis has a whole lecture on that is really enlightening. But the bottom line is that yes, the tannins do make a big difference. And again, as long as they're not overly sharp and to the point of where they are causing their own kind of sharpness that has to be endured along with the alcohol. But yeah, you can definitely dry it out. And the different types of tannins too: grape tannin, oak tannin, gallberry tannin. Because like the tannin gallicool, or the white fluffy tannin, comes from the oak galls, those little things that grow on the oak trees themselves, rather than the tree itself. And different kind of tannins can make a big difference. And now there's just like this gigantic selection of different tannins that you can use to adjust your mead and your wine and anything else that you want to use it in, actually. One of the old tricks when I wanted some sharpness a long time ago, and I didn't want to use grape tannin or an abundance of oak, was to go out and buy, like a flat of Macintosh apples and peel them, leaving just a little bit of the meat on there, but mostly just the skin, and go in there with, a 10-inch chef knife and chop those things into pumice and put them into a grain bag and put them in there to get some of that astringency from that malic astringency from the skin. That's a character that I really, really like. And and that'll swing it toward the dryness kind of level too. Kind of pulls the palate. Crit Stock had a really good bottom of the barrel mellow, as he called it, that had a finished at 040, but you would have sworn it was down at 020 based on the kind of fruit that he was using, along with the acid addition that he was making and the tannin addition. And he did a really good job on that as well. And so, yes, the perception of sweetness can indeed be influenced in the direction of sweet or dry based on the kind of adjustments you make to the mead with oak tannin and oak itself and acid adjustments and grape, as well as other treatments. Lees will help bring that heat from the alcohol down if you're doing some surly, some batonnage. As the cellular lysis occurs and the cells lyse, they release all of these like organelle that have all of these really beneficial kind of flavors to them that influence. At the beginning, you can use something like Opti White, Opti Red, Booster Rouge, Booster White, Noblesse, that are all specific inactivated yeasts that you can put in to add palate softness or roundness or heft on the palate. And that's some of the things when I'm talking about sensory that you'll hear me say is, pick up your glass and look at the mead, get a sense of it, and see what kind of heft it has in the glass. And by heft, I mean what kind of, literally weight, but also, how does it feel when you move it around? Does it feel like it's just water in there, or does it feel like there's something in there that's got, a little bit of body behind it and some character behind it as you swirl it? Does it coat the glass? Do you see the tears or the legs dropping down? Is it slow? Is it fast when the legs come down? Are they close together or are they spaced apart? Does it seem viscous and glyceric, or does it seem thin and watery? So when you swirl it around, you get a sense of heft in the glass. And that's one of the other things that I don't see a lot of with dry meads, is dry meads that, have that kind of leggy and viscous and thick kind of character. And I don't mean syrupy, but something that has, a good, strong palate presence, and is there with some weight in the palate to give you a mouth-filling kind of experience as you're tasting it.
So, Pete, I think we all understand that to get that, we could add, certainly alcohol will give you more volume, more structure. Gravity would also do that. Certain yeast strains will create polysaccharides,
right,
to create more volume. I've actually tried, and I hate to say the even word, but I've tried to use raisins and prunes to increase mouth volume. Are there, other than that, and then I think you spoke of Opti White and Optimum White, I think it's called. Those will also give some volume. What other things can we do if we're making a mead and we're shooting at a particular, either a sweetness level or an ABV that doesn't necessarily lend itself to very much volume? What other things besides what I've already mentioned can we use to create more volume?
Well, I think that's, post or toward the end of or post-fermentation, you can make additions as well, and that's where certain lees protocol come in, the Sur Lee, as I was talking about before, and the fine fresh lees protocol that Lallemand originally had out was to take a packet of D254 and just dump it in right at the end of fermentation, because of course the yeast wouldn't come back through and get rehydrated. They'd just go ahead and die from alcohol toxicity, and then they'd lyse and release all of that internal organelle. A lot of the specific inactivated yeast that they're selling now More beer has most of them out there